Thank you all for being here this morning. We're going to give it another minute or so, make sure everyone's getting in the room with us here. I'm going to start with just a little housekeeping. First of all, good morning, and thank you all for being here. The structure of this event is going to be introductions, then a program with Dr. Regina Griego on her book, Sins of the System, Trauma, Guns, Tragedy, and the Betrayal of Our Children. And lastly, we'll have time to take any questions or comments. If you have any technical difficulties, feel free to type in your concern in the chat box. I'll assist you there. To ask a question or make a comment, please raise your hand to be unmuted, or you can type it in the chat box or that Q&A box, and we will address them at the appropriate time. Dr. Regina Griego is a coach, author, and speaker. She retired from a distinguished career as an engineer. Regina was born and raised in New Mexico, and her Hispanic roots go back 400 years. She is married with 6 children in a blended family and has 7 grandchildren. Regina has mentored many young people as a professor, senior engineer, and leadership coach. She is an active member of organizations that support gun safety and juvenile justice. Regina is a Georgetown-trained coach and a fellow of the INCOSE, the largest international systems engineering professional organization. She holds a PhD, MS, and BS in electrical and computer engineering and an MS in computer science. Please allow me to introduce the national award-winning and Amazon bestseller, among many other awards, Sins of the System, Trauma, Guns, Tragedy, and the Betrayal of Our Children. This is a story of courage and conviction, as well as love, compassion, and hope. In January 2013, Regina's 15-year-old nephew shot and killed his father, her brother, mother, and 3 siblings. She became her nephew's guardian and stood by him through 7 years of legal drama. In this memoir, she recounts her extremely difficult and personal story that affected her large extended family and entire community. It is a tragedy about generational trauma set in the rich cultural background of New Mexico. The book details the failure of not only the juvenile justice system, but many other systems that undergird families and society, including gun safety. This memoir is both a warning and a call to action for families, communities, and our nation. Please welcome Dr. Regina Griego.
Let me unmute myself. Hi, Jessica. Thank you for inviting me to do this virtual reading. I did a launch, but this is my first virtual reading, so I'll do my best. So I wanted to start with a poem that's in the book. It's called Inheritance. The bittersweet lineage, slant of the eyes, width of the hips, treasure and tenacity, pride, fortitude. To think of my paternal grandmother alone on the llano for months with many little ones, or my great-grandmother Lupita, embittered by the harsh land and her harsher husband. To recognize the way my brother was just like my mother, and how his son, like his father, the scapegoat, the crybaby. Fruit of the tangled vine, conquerors and the conquered, people who belong to the land, claimed by many. Dare I claim my name after the sacrifice? What do I claim with that name? Does this mean that indeed my mother was the black sheep and my brother as well? Does this confirm that my siblings and I were the rats that my maternal grandmother chased out of her house? Was my brother's redemption from LA gang leader to pastor that even I hailed a farce, a facade? My sister left the scene and wants to distance her children from the controversy. They escaped. My brother wants to keep things as quiet as possible. He and his son have to live in this town after all. The offender's siblings have scattered and have proclaimed my brother, their father, a saint, El Santo. The rest of the family, including my father, has dismissed him as a bad seed. I cannot dismiss a child, especially one with my brother's eyes. He has inherited my love, and I continue to hope for redemption. I see the intellect, the pride, and the tenacity that is our inheritance in him. Yet there remains trepidation in him claiming that inheritance. And I fear that I cannot love adequately. Well, thank you all for joining. I appreciate you being here on this Saturday morning. Very hot morning these days. I wanted to start by just letting you know why I did this book. First of all, for me, it was a descanso. There's three reasons. The first one is that it was a way for me to put it, pin it to the page. In Spanish, there's a term called descanso, and you see these all along the highways. They're flower markers, crosses usually. And it is a place to move the spirit on, to encourage the soul to move on. And this was my descanso of the entire journey that I had with my nephew. I also did it. The second reason I did it is because the media coverage was horrible. And it was really hard for me to counter the narrative that they started with, which was to make this kid out to be a monster, when he was basically a prisoner in his own household. And so it was a way to counter the narrative. And it was hard in just a few sentences to explain to people, my brother's background, my mom and the way she was, and her story as well. And I do that a bit, and it's the generational trauma that I'm trying to get across. So trying to tell that story, my viewpoint on the story was very complicated. And because I knew the story, my immediate reaction when the deaths happened was to see what was going on with Nehemiah, because he had shown he wasn't a truant. He never did anything that gave us a sign that he would, this kind of tragedy would happen. And the last reason was social change. I just won an International Book Award and I thought I put it in the memoir category, but I got a winner, which was great. But it was in social change. And that made me happy only because that was my third reason. I want to see change in the juvenile justice, in the way we deal with guns, and such things as, homeschooling and the way we manage that. It's not that I'm against homeschooling, I just think it needs to be better managed. So those are the three reasons I started, or that I wrote this book. And it has transformed my soul in a very fundamental way. And I have been able to participate in law change. I will tell you a little bit about the juvenile justice laws that have changed, or law that has changed that for the better, and to salvage our children. So I will start the reading with page 21, and it is the third chapter in the book. Let me go back. Um, so this is chapter 3, the unthinkable. The call came on my cell phone at around 1 a.m. that mid-January morning, 2013. My cell was usually off at night, but I left it on unintentionally. Auntie Gina, is it true? Is my dad and the family dead? The words did not register. My mind could not take them in. Although familiar at first, I didn't recognize the woman's voice on the other end of the line, and what she was saying didn't fully sink into my sleepy brain. I haven't heard anything, I responded. Have you talked to Jenny? She insisted. I finally realized it was Carla, my brother Tom's second eldest daughter, who lived in California. Jenny, Tom and Amy's eldest, was her half-sister and lived in Albuquerque with her husband. She continued, I read on Facebook that my whole family was killed. They said it was a murder-suicide, but I know my dad wouldn't do anything like that. There's no way. Finally, I woke up enough to realize the gravity of what she was saying. Not knowing how to respond, I struggled through a response. I will try to contact Jenny. Hanging up the phone, my head and my heart swelled to the point where sobs came out, and I woke up Mark. Frantically, I tried to call Jenny. My hands were shaking, and at that moment, she was calling me. She confirmed that her father, mother, and 3 of her younger siblings were dead. She and her husband were at the sheriff's building where they were holding her brother Ezekiel. I've been trying to contact Aunt Janice and Uncle Leo, but they didn't answer, she said, and asked me to call them. I was reeling as I tried calling my brother Leo. Who did not answer, so I left a cryptic message. After trying other numbers for Janice, I called my niece, Janice's daughter. Forcing the words out of my mouth, I told her that I learned what I learned. Tom, Amy, Malachi, Miriam, and Grace were killed in their house. We don't know anything else. Sobbing and squeaking a bit, I tried to get the next sentence out. I am trying to contact your mom. Do you have any other numbers? I'll find her. I'll get a hold of her, she retorted in a very matter-of-fact way. After hanging up, I was unsure of what to do. Tears just kept streaming down my face and my heart was heavy. This just can't be true. I thought to myself, my heart pounding, the adrenaline surging. Should I drive in the middle of the night to Leo's house? Should I go to the sheriff's building? The shock and horror of the news left me disoriented. Mark made coffee and I was dressing. And as I was dressing, the phone rang. It was Janice. She was dressing to go to Leo's house. I'll meet you there, I said. We blubbered a bit about what happened, not knowing how to make sense of what our nieces had told us. We drove the familiar streets to the house where I grew up and that Leo bought after my mom died. Leo wanted to live in the old Albuquerque neighborhood of Betrayal. The night was dark at 1:40 a.m. and my head was racing with thoughts and questions as I stared out the car window. Mark and I arrived at Leo's house before Janice. We rang the door a few times, aware that their 3-year-old was sleeping. When Leo answered the door, he was clearly half asleep. Throwing myself into his arms, he kept saying, "What happened? What happened?" As best I could express through tears, I told him what we had learned and gave him the few details that I pieced together from my brief conversations with Carla and Jenny. In a familiar way, he pressed his hands to each side of his forehead, stroking his short, kinky hair back on both sides. He said, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God," over and over again. Crying, I studied my brother's reaction. His face was white, and a shocked glaze came over his eyes. "I tried to call you, and so did Ginny," I said. He went for his cell. He searched. He started to question me, and I had few answers. Then he started to scroll the messages on his phone. So it was quite shocking to learn, and it took us a little while. That evening, we spent so the murders occurred on an early Saturday morning. Started at 1:30 and then ended when my brother died at 6 o'clock in the morning. And then my nephew had gone off to the church. My brother was a pastor at the largest evangelical church in Albuquerque, and he was meeting a young lady there and spent the day. And it wasn't until the evening that people started questioning him, and he finally confessed. And so it was early in the morning before he was being questioned in the sheriff's building. And the whole story came out. But meanwhile, we didn't find out what exactly happened until early morning on Sunday, when we talked to the people that were out in front of the house. And so as things unraveled and the reality of what happened sank in, we called the different family members. We have a large family. I have about on the order of 50 first cousins from both sides of the family. And they, so we have this kind of calling tree where we call, the aunts, and they'll call their kids and other associated people. And it took a while before it spread through the family. And then people were coming over my brother's house. The person I call Leo in the book. And it's the small house that I grew up in. And it was the thoughts that you have at that time are, gosh, I'm glad my mom's not here anymore, even though I miss her a lot. And anyway, the story goes on, and we learned a little bit more through the legal system what had happened to Nehemiah. And I visited Nehemiah right away, like on Monday. Tried to visit him on Sunday afternoon, but that didn't work out. And then he was very disoriented. I could tell he had some sort of mental break. And later we found that he had a diagnosis of trauma-induced schizoaffective disorder with severe depression. And but the family was together, and the media was terrible, and my brother Leo was really working hard to counter the narrative that they were putting on Nehemiah. And the celebration of the lives of the family was over 2,000 people at the evangelical church that my brother belonged to. And it's overflowing, and they had a huge flag out in front that was being held up by a crane. And so my brother did do a lot of good things at the church, but we learned a few other things about him, and I will talk about that later. So right now I'd like to go to my journey of healing, and I'll position myself there now. So I realized not long after everything happened, well, within a week or two, that Well, I did a little bit of therapy, you know, I was working at Sandia Labs at the time, and they have a ERP program. It's where you can get free counseling, and I did that, but I needed to go away because I was dealing with the, you know, visiting Nehemiah, the legal issues, you know, all the family and all the, you know, the things that we had to do with my brother Tom's house. And but I decided to take time in late February and early May or early March to go to a place called Golden Willow. And I specifically asked for a therapist that was also an Apache shaman, and his name is Jim. And I talked about descansos early, and this drumming journey that I did with, which was part of my healing, the 10 days that I spent at Golden Willow Retreat House in Taos, is where I got the ideas and the intentions for doing my own descansos for the family. And so this is the drumming journey. For the drumming journey, and this is chapter 20, chapter 11, A Necessary Retreat, page 83. For the drumming journey, I went to Jim's house nearby. It was a sprawling adobe structure on a large property with a cliff face behind in the distance. Later, I would return there for the sweat lodge, for which he used the tent and fire pit in the back of the property. He would also conduct vision quests on that property from time to time. When I entered his home, which he built largely by himself, I was nervous, not knowing what to expect. From the entrance area, I went into the main living space with a kitchen that was open to the living area. The living area had many couches and chairs and was decorated mostly with native artifacts. The large windows opened to the cliff face, and it was a peaceful place made more so by the quiet, gentle man who lived there. After pleasantries, like getting something to drink, we settled in and he explained a bit about the drumming journey. Find a spot on the floor or one of the couches to lay on. You will be there for a bit, so you need to be comfortable. Jim would be drumming and would guide me through the process while he drummed. I settled in on the floor parallel to one of the couches with my head toward Jim, using pillows as necessary to make myself comfortable. As Jim began drumming, I felt my body sink into the floor and allowed myself to relax. I listened to Jim's words. Seek your power, animal. Let your imagination drift. Soon the drums put me in a meditative state. At first, I saw what looked like buffalo, then a parade of a bunch of other animals that looked like they were in a talking circle, including an owl, coyote, wolf, and eagle. The raven came and flew around as if he wanted me to follow him. He joined other ravens, then asked me to fly with him. I can't, I replied. Lift your feet, he said, flying ahead. So I did, like a plane lifting landing gear. I took off flying over the river. The cottonwoods below outlined the Rio Grande. We went to Tom's house, coming down on the roof of the house. I'm not sure I want to be here, I told Raven. He said I had to see, and that it was important. I flew with him through the extra apartments, the garage, the barn, the extra rooms behind the garage and barn. Then he led me inside. As we went in the familiar kitchen entrance, we ran around the countertop island, and I shuddered like something was under there. Ravens started pecking at the end of the island, but I didn't want to get too close. Part of me wanted to check under the cabinets, but I didn't like the energy in my body. I coaxed Raven away, and he went up to the ceiling, and we went into Miriam and Grace's room. I told Raven, I want to honor the girls. Draw a circle, he replied. I drew a circle, but was interrupted by a three-headed serpent that was rattling away, talking and talking, their heads off in the corner of the room. I'm not sure what they were saying, but they made me uncomfortable. And I told Raven I wanted to go to Malachi and Amy. I was in the hall looking in the direction of Amy's room and saw Malachi's face. I danced or jumped toward the bedroom with the sound of the drum. On my way there, I saw Grace as if she was an angel, translucent. As I got closer to the bedroom, Malachi went away. I looked into the room. On the far wall, I saw Amy's body drop to the floor, then go up. Again, I asked, how can I honor them? I particularly wanted to honor Malachi because he saw Ezekiel, who he idolized, kill him. I looked up and saw Amy holding Malachi like a Madonna figure in a Pieta pose. And she said, he's okay. I'm comforting him. I asked her, how can I honor you? She replied, a red rose. Do you want more than one? I asked. One is enough, she replied. What about Malachi? I asked with no reply. The only thing that came to mind was a drumstick, because Malachi eagerly learned to play drums for his big brother Ezekiel, from his big brother Ezekiel. I laid the rose down with the drumstick across it and bowed my head to leave. I looked around the room trying to think of what else I could do. The walls were sparkling white. Looking at Raven, I asked, are you my power animal? He shook his head no. Then he disappeared and Black Panther appeared. I asked her the same question. She gave me a growl in the affirmative. I said, what about my brother? I want to honor him. We went downstairs and I asked him, how can I honor him? She said, give him your heart. So I put a red heart that came from Panther in the place where Tom died. The heart looked very red against Panther's black fur. It was time to leave, and Panther led me out to the river and started running, asking me to follow. I can't keep up, I panted. So she put me on her back. We ran and ran along the river north toward my house to a sandy area by the river where I walked to often. She took me off her back and started licking me, my feet and my heart, like I was her cub. Her tongue was very dark pink and it stood out against her black fur. The vision ended there. When Jim drummed fast, signifying the end of the journey, I went backward through the vision. As instructed, I experienced the same shudder in my body at that island countertop area. It was a repulsion, like it was evil, and it lingered. So that was the drumming journey. That was the first time I had ever done a drumming journey, and I did several more over the course of the 7 years with Jim. But I had done sweats, and that was part of the last thing I did before I left after the 10 days. And let's see. And my healing journey went on to be to include a year-long immersion in a place called Animas Valley Institute in Durango. They do. It was founded by a man who was a Jungian psychologist, and he also immersed himself in indigenous ways, not just from the Americas, but also other countries. And he incorporates a lot of nature into his retreats. And so over the course of 2014, I did 4 retreats with the same group of people and the same 2 guides. And we, it was just an enormous way of processing what happened to our family, and it was a way of connecting to myself in the midst of dealing with all of the family issues and all of the legal issues, and learning a lot of things about what happened in my brother's house. And so 3 of those were where I camped out. The third one, I did a vision fast where I fasted for 4 days. And it was a way of healing with my own sense of who I was. Anybody that's gone through any kind of tragedy or loss, society mirrors that to you in different ways and tries to impose what you should feel or what you shouldn't feel or how you should be, and you get a sense of disorientation about that kind of stuff. And so between that and doing a lot of writing, I is how I was healing. So Nehemiah was incarcerated in the meantime, and I was working hard. And it was in 2014, which is almost a year, a little over a year, that I was able to, working with the legal team, get him into the adolescent treatment center. And that's when we really started getting an idea, because when he was at the detention center, they were just keeping him there primarily for the purpose of keeping him calm. He was suicidal when he went in, and so they didn't really give him any kind of therapy. And it took about a year before his medication stabilized him. He was on antipsychotics and antidepressives and then sleep medicine, but he didn't get the treatment there, and the education wasn't the best. They were trying to gear him towards a GRE or GED. And then, but we got him into adolescent treatment center in February of 2014. And that is when we were learning just a lot about what was going on. And his medical needs were addressed. And over the course of that time, when he first joined the adolescent treatment center, they tested him as a 3rd grader. Mostly, except for reading. He was a 7th grader, but he read by memorizing words instead of phonetically. And he jumped 4 grades in the period of the 19-20 months that he was there. Mind you, he was 17 at this point. And that brings me to the homeschooling. I support homeschooling, but New Mexico's laws on homeschooling is basically you enroll your children, and there's no follow-up that they're making progress or any kind of interviews with the child or anything like that. And so in Ezekiel's case, he was basically being isolated and trained to be a soldier. And I'll read a little bit about that, by his father. And he spent a lot of time at the church, but because my brother was a pastor there, he was under his watchful eye. And other than the church, he spent most of his time at home in a large compound or a large set of buildings in his house. There would be family events, but the children wouldn't mix. I don't know if you've been to large Hispanic weddings and things like that, where the kids are just running around and dancing and playing with each other. Their kids didn't circulate that much. So I want to read you a little bit about what we were learning during this time with what was going on in my brother's house. When Ezekiel was 12 years old, his mother and he had a disagreement, and he sassed her back. He may have hit her, he wasn't sure. His dad called him into his parents' room, AKA the Coor, C-O-O-R, commander of operations room. His father, or the commander, was sitting on the bed looking at him calmly. Ezekiel stood at attention, standing between the window and the foot of the bed. Tom told him to come closer, so he took a small step forward. He knew what might be coming. Tom asked him to come closer again, and he took another small step. Next thing he knew, he's on his back, and Tom was on top of him. Tom pinned his arm to his side using his legs, and he was punching Ezekiel's face. After the fourth or fifth hit, Ezekiel blacked out. When he woke up in his bed, he remembered what happened and got up and went to the bathroom to look in the mirror. He had a black left eye and a bruised face. Later, Tom called him into the Coor again. When Ezekiel went in, his dad was getting ready for church. He ordered Ezekiel to be silent about what happened, and if anyone asked, he was to say that they were wrestling, and he accidentally headbutted him. Ezekiel followed his dad's orders when they went to church, and people seemed to believe his story. At least no one pressed the issue. Tom continued beating Ezekiel until the day the family died. Jenny's husband reported visiting with Jenny after they were married and found Tom beating Ezekiel. He tried to pull Tom off of him. During our therapy, we decided that it would be good to have Ezekiel watch the memorial video so he could see the impact of his actions had on others, and for closure. Because he had also experienced the loss of his family, the first time we tried, he couldn't get past procession before he became anxious and started crying. We waited another couple of months and tried again. This time, he was able to watch the whole thing, silently crying from time to time. So they determined that he had traumatic brain injury. Remember that he was getting, the defense team brought in psychological experts, and this whole process went on. It was 3 years before a plea agreement was reached. There were several incidents like that I discuss in the book where Nehemiah endured a version of trauma that is unusual and very scarring. And that, the diagnosis was trauma-induced schizoaffective disorder. And he was having hallucinations starting about the time that his dad knocked him out, audio and visual hallucinations. And the night of the incident, he actually was listening to an audio hallucination that we started calling Sarge later, because in the adolescent treatment center, we would have family counseling with my brother Leo and me and him and the therapist. And I could hear my mother even in some of the things that he was saying about what his father was saying. And so based on all this trauma, we were just trying to get to the point where he was healed. And it didn't, he couldn't get there entirely, but the amenability hearing got him to the point where he was, the plea agreement got him to the point where he could do an amenability treatment or amenability hearing, which means it put him in the juvenile justice system. And amenability just means he was salvageable. He was amenable to treatment in available facilities. And my goodness, when you're going through this process, anybody that has gone through this process, you have to, read legal documents, learn all the legal processes, and it's quite formidable experience. So I'm going to end this with reading during the amenability hearing. So as I said, the family was all together, and during the memorial service and everybody said they were supporting Nehemiah. And but then at the amenability hearing, something had shifted. This was 3 years later, in his half sister in particular, and then she was sort of the one that led her two other sisters to basically change their mind on the way they wanted Nehemiah to be treated in the legal system. So I'm going to read a piece from the amenability hearing. Let me see if I can get there. We hadn't heard of any other relatives coming in from out of town for the amenability hearing except Janice and her daughter. For moral support, my daughter was coming on Sunday before the hearing, and my best friend came on Wednesday, the week of the hearing. Mark and I returned from a trip to Nashville late on Saturday, January 9th, 2016, because we needed Sunday to visit Ezekiel, rest, and prepare for the next week. That evening, Leo told me, looks like a letter was written to the judge and the Albuquerque Journal from Jenny, Dad, and Dad's stepchildren. They want Ezekiel to go to prison. It was not something I expected. Ginny was meek and not one to write much, and my father was feeble. After Leo talked with Jack, Nehemiah's attorney, he concluded that it must have been my father's stepson who was behind this. I was confused. What does he have to do with any of this? The next morning, on the Sunday front page of the Albuquerque Journal, the article titled, "Teen Who Killed Family in Court This Week." In the article, they wrote, "The tragedy has split much of his extended family. A local aunt and uncle support a juvenile sentence and treatment for Pacheco, but his grandfather, older sister, and other family members are urging the judge to impose an adult prison sentence." This was the first time I knew that our family was split. Who were these other family members? Surely they weren't talking about my stepmother's children. We barely knew them. Our father and his wife left when I was 8, and our father rarely came around or supported us after they left. Tom spent some time in California as an adult after he left the Army, and he had relationships with our stepmother's children. He would hang out with them and get high. I guess you could loosely call them family. The amenability hearing started at 9 a.m. on Monday, but we wanted to be there when Ezekiel arrived, and we wanted to sit as close to him as possible. Mark and I had worked hard to get him ready over the previous weeks, buying him dress shirts with sweaters to go over them, nice pants, a belt, and shoes. Leo got him a dress coat since it was winter. Everything looked so big on him. He was still skinny, even though he had gained half again his original body weight since his incarceration. We arrived at the children's courthouse just before 8 a.m., pulling into the back parking area. At the same time, Channel 13 news truck was pulling in, and my stomach tightened. The media terrified me, and they seemed so menacing. They wanted the most salacious story they could tell, and they didn't care who told it to them. We walked quickly to the courthouse and made our way through the security screening as efficiently as possible and swiftly made our way to Judge Bach's courtroom. We were in the courtroom less than 3 months prior for the plea hearing, so it was familiar to us. Mark, my daughter, and I settled in on the bench right behind where Ezekiel and his defense team would be sitting. It was just after 8 a.m. when Leo and Lily came, and at about 8:30, and settled in next to us. Janice and my niece sat behind us. Ezekiel's sister, Carla, Julie, and Jenny arrived after Leo. Julie had her 5-year-old daughter with her. About 3 of our cousins came, including the one who sang at Calvary during the memorial service. Carla was very standoffish and sat near the back of the 5-bench courtroom behind us. I hadn't seen Ezekiel's sisters since Carla's wedding almost a year ago. They all greeted us at the wedding, but something changed. Leo went back to talk to her, and she was very terse, avoided eye contact, didn't smile, and generally seemed hurt and upset with us. Ezekiel soon arrived and sat behind the social worker and his attorneys, between his social worker and his attorneys. The guards from the treatment center escorted him in, and we knew them all because we had visited often over the last 22 months. The social worker and I talked. "How's he doing?" I asked. "Fine, he's very nervous," and we tried to remind him not to bite his nails or fidget with his hands. She said Ezekiel barely had nails at this point, and often one or the other of his fingertips were bleeding. It was going to take a good bit of focus and self-control not to fidget today. So something shifted, and that sort of led to, at that first amenability, Nehemiah did get the amenable to treatment in available facilities and the decision to get out at 21. But there was a big reaction to that from his sisters and other family and community members. I mean, there was a lot of community that supported him staying in the juvenile system. And that was the difficulty, because it was getting out at age 21, or him, potentially being sent to prison for life. And ultimately, right before he was going to get out, the appeal that they put together came through, and they demanded a second amenability hearing. And the outcome of that ended up being that he was sent to prison, and he had to serve a sentence, a life plus 7 years before he would even get the chance for parole. Now, I was telling you that we've done some juvenile justice work, and just this session, a bill was passed that abolishes life without parole for children, or people that commit crimes as children. And those that are put in prison will get a chance after 15 years of serving to go before a parole board. And that's for most cases. If there's multiple first degrees and other circumstances, then it'll be 20 or 25. And that's just to get a chance to go before the parole board, because the child changes tremendously. And now I'd like to open it up. I've been talking for, a good 45 minutes. So, Jessica, if you're ready.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing all of those chapters in your story. And I know it's not an easy thing to share. Appreciate it. So we have one here. And if anyone has a question or comment they'd like to make, feel free to raise your hand to be unmuted, and you may ask or comment yourself. You can also type your question or comment in the chat box or that Q&A box down below, and I can read that for you. Lewis writes, New Mexico is ranked 50th, dead last in the US for child welfare and education. It is also a state with some of the highest child poverty in America. What role do you think child poverty and this state's poor child welfare record played, if any, in the tragedy that befell your family? And what can we as New Mexicans do to help prevent these types of events going forward?
Well, that's $1 million question there, Liz. Yes, is the short answer. I was very poor, very, very poor. And my brother Greg, sorry, I keep interchanging their real names with their names in the book, Tom, suffered a lot as a male growing up in the barrio. And my mom's just desperation at raising 4 children by herself. She was, and this is what I found out when she died by looking at her tax, because she kept everything. And in 1978, her tax, she earned $7,800, and she was raising 4 children by herself. And so my brother joining the military, I'm almost positive he was suffering from PTSD and a lot of the trauma that he incurred as a child, which is what I tried to emphasize at the beginning of the story, or actually they're flashbacks of the story of my brother Greg, or Tom. And anyway, and then my brother went on to have a total of 10 children, of which he couldn't really provide for all of them. And the poverty that we saw in his household, and I talk about how hungry the children were. So yes, is the short answer. And CYFD was called, and they failed the process for him. And so what can we do as New Mexicans? Well, we've got a governor that's doing a good job with childcare, which is tremendous. And there's a real need to make the connection, because my mom wasn't always aware of what was offered in the way of social services. And in some ways, there's an inherent, amongst Hispanics especially, and probably indigenous people, inherent distrust of the government, because they're going to, somehow round them up or take their kids away or whatever, and this gets passed on. And so we just need to, as we befriend families that are struggling, get the word out and help them find the social services. That's the best thing we can do. And also support some of these programs for childcare, preschool. My salvation was school, honestly. That's why I got so many degrees. It's I got free lunch and free breakfast there. It was more or less a safe place. I mean, there were a lot of little fights, and I got a lot of good attention, good mirroring, because I was good in math and things like that. So supporting our teachers in our schools is obviously a way to save our children. The hard part with Ezekiel is they didn't put him in public schools. So we need to shore up the laws on homeschooling so that these children do have somebody else that's looking at them and watching them.
Thank you, Regina. John writes, did you have your family members read the transcript before publishing?
Well, I did have my brother Tom and also Ezekiel read it, and of course my husband Mark, and other family members like that. The extended family that opposed Nehemiah, we haven't been in entire touch, and that's part of the reason why I changed the names. no matter how I told the story, this is such a publicized story, so they could do the web searches and whatnot. And I tried to cover it, and this was probably one of the highest compliments that I got from the national award I won, the National Federation of Press Women, is that it's a very journalistic style of memoir that I did, because I had so many emails, notes from doctors and lawyers and the hearings, and just so much that was there that I just basically told the story from that perspective, and then added some of the family dynamics, and also my personal journal, healing journey. So I feel like it would be very hard to argue with what I wrote. And so, but reaching out to Carla, his half sister, that was pretty, that testified, as she was sort of the key witness in the second set of amenability hearings. They didn't believe in psychology or psychotherapy. They held strong to the notion that Nehemiah made this whole thing up about his father, and his and so it would be very hard to get some kind of agreement about the story from them, and that's part of the journey in the story.
Thank you. How do you think the story for your family relates to the series of mass shootings that have happened since 2013?
That's interesting, because with my perspective, based on what happened to my family, when the Uvalde shooting went on, I wanted to know more about the shooter. It alarms me that so many men or young men are so disenfranchised, or somehow hurting in a way that we don't know how to address. And being an engineer and knowing things like safety triangles, it's also a security triangle. What you see at the very top of the triangle, almost like the iceberg that's above the ocean, that is mass murderers, people that commit these kinds of things, is just an indication of everything below that, which is all of the, murder, suicides, all of these gang violence, et cetera, and so forth. And below that is all of the things that are just misses. And then below that are all the things that causes just misses. And that's where we want to get to in our legislation, is, how do we deal with guns sensibly? I'm not saying take guns off the street. I mean, take guns away from people. That's not what I'm saying. That will never happen. Same thing with homeschooling. I'm not saying don't let people homeschool. I know people that do a very good job homeschooling, but we need to get it to the things that cause, these other things to happen. Poverty, as was mentioned, is a big deal. And addressing what's going on with our young men is, not an area that I have delved into. I just know it in my, I've seen it in my son. He's doing very well now, but he struggled for a little while. So what's going on with our young men in particular,
Martha Burns is here. I believe she's another author who wrote a fiction story, but very closely related to your true events. Martha writes, Regina, had you not stepped in, or had you not been named guardian, can you imagine what would have happened to your nephew? And do you think the defense attorneys could have done more?
Oh, I'm so happy you're here, Martha. And thank you for allowing me to speak out at your reading at Santa Fe Library. Let's see. Well, the second, the appeal that Nehemiah did to the the last sentencing that he got, there was discussion on what happened the night of the arrest and how they treated him. And there was, even though his sister was in the sheriff's building, they didn't call her into the room. They had my information. They did not call me. He was in there for 2 hours he's 100 pounds. Clearly, in my mind, when I saw him, he was clearly, something had gone wrong with his, mental health. And they eagerly took his story and then immediately reported everything he said the next day. And so that whole process of handling a child like that, he hadn't slept in 2 days. That's something that they gave up with the plea agreement. And I don't know, these people in the legal system, do things. And so maybe the prosecution agreed to the plea agreement because this was one of the first times that the defense attorneys felt like they had a good case for insanity at the time of the crime. So I didn't know enough, and I have no basis of comparison, but it did feel like there's a few places where they may have missed. And I forgot the first portion of the question. I was going to address it.
Had you not stepped in or had you not been named guardian, can you imagine what would have happened to your nephew?
Well, that was the other thing, is that the amount of just pushback we got from the detention center. And of course, I had to work really hard to get him into the adolescent treatment center. And then when he got his sentence, his first sentence and went into YDDC, again, there's a hostility toward him because children were killed. And we took care of him. We visited him regularly. And what was strange was, even at YDDC, they say a lot of families just don't go visit their children, and they just go through the cracks of the system. And a large amount of them are Black and Hispanic. I mean, if I can remember at the detention center looking at the lines of kids that would, form for different reasons, going to different things. And there'd be, on the order of, 12 or so of them, of which maybe one or two were white, and the rest of them were Hispanic and Black. And these people do not have strong, my brother Leo has enormous social capital. And of course, I, beat down the system the best I could, but there's a lot of children that don't have the advocacy, and it's sad to think about.
Corey shares, I commend your empathy and bravery. My ex-husband is abusive, and I've spent many years trying to get treatment and justice for the many family members affected. Like your nephew, I have endured so much of what I call victim blaming. I continue to fight for my son while the system, particularly in Utah, enables our abuser. The laws that supposedly protect us are not enforced. We are punished for advocating for ourselves. Agencies that are supposed to protect us fail us and punish us. Agencies that are supposed to help us recover hold us down, reinforcing our poverty and trauma.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
And my brother in particular, and I love him. And I loved him to the, during the time that he was alive. And I tell the story, our intimate story of our relationship a little bit in the beginning. And it's hard because these are people you love. At the same time, you cannot condone what they've done. And the difficult part, and this is what I always come back to, and I've gotten pushback for this, is that he was the adult in that family. He was the adult in that family, him and his wife. He had a pretty dominant relationship, sort of a typical Old Testament kind of relationship with his wife because of the fundamentalist beliefs, but he was the adult. And once you're an adult, you have to make different choices, I believe.
Ida writes, can you speak a little more broadly to the issues of scapegoating and generational trauma that you had mentioned in the beginning?
Well, scapegoating is, it happens a lot in dysfunctional families. If you read some of the family systems literature, I was immersed in that when I started my recovery efforts from what happened to me as a child, which was about 1985. So I've been in this kind of healing stuff for a long time. And generally in dysfunctional families, you have the hero, the scapegoat, the lost child, and then the comedian PR person. And our family followed that, except that I somehow juxtaposed my elder sister. She became sort of the lost child. A lot of the times the lost children are also ones that go on to be nurses and things like that. You know, my brother was the canonical PR person, the youngest one. But Greg ended up being in that position of the scapegoat. And it's, written about in family systems, and you can look at it look around for that kind of stuff. And it's a pattern. Once you recognize it, it's hard to unsee, And anyway, my mom was in that position. She was the second child, and my grandmother's eldest was the one that was held out as the end all and be all. And so this dynamic that happens, and the same thing with Nehemiah. Nehemiah fell second and his sister was the one that basically became the caregiver for all of the kids. So it's one of those things where it's based on the parents, what that hero looks like, but it's definitely a shaft. And the whole role of the scapegoat is that we would be totally normal if it weren't for you, and that's exactly the way they posed the case, the whole court case against Nehemiah, his sisters. Oh, we were so normal and we did so many normal things, but Nehemiah, he was just a bad, willful child since the day he was born, which is bullshit. Sorry, but that's the story we tell ourselves about scapegoats.
Thank you so much, Regina. One final question, since you're from John. Since you're an author now, will you write another book?
Yes. In fact, I've got to devote my fall and winter to it. The next book, and I'm playing with the titles, but right now it's based on my journey through my professional. Because a lot of people, especially in my colleagues, when they learn about this book, which they didn't know anything about my personal history, most of them didn't anyway, said, but how did you do it? And it's like, so that's the question I'm going to ask. And one of the titles is They Can't Take Away What I Know, which was something that after a beating from my mom, I set out on the stoop of the house and I said, they can take everything from me, but they can't take away what I know. And so that's one of the titles I'm playing with, but it's basically my journey from that environment that I put together in this book to becoming a PhD and being successful in my professional society and all of that kind of stuff. I don't know exactly all the ground that I will cover, but that's what the basic premise of it is.
Thank you so much, Dr. Regina Griego, for writing this book and sharing it with the world. It's won many awards and has propelled advocacy and addressing issues in juvenile justice and among other things. And I just appreciate you doing this and writing this and being so strong. This is so difficult. Not a lot of people could have done what you've done and been so strong throughout it all. So I'm just really grateful for you, and thank you so much for sharing with us, and thank you for everyone who's here today. Yeah. Any final thoughts before we say we head to our weekends?
Well, and for those who have patience to hang on, I'm going to read a short poem. And this is, I had such an influx of the spirit, muse, whatever, during this time in writing. And this is based on, if anybody knows the Women That Run with the Wolves and Clarissa Pinkola Estes, which is one of my favorite authors and teachers. And she's also a Jungian psychologist. My heart is in the cave. La Loba, the wolf woman, sings in the cave. She sings over my life, sings for the children, sings for the generations. I am in the cave with her, awaiting the resurrection, awaiting the time when the flesh is plump again and I can run strong and full of life. My days are in deep abiding with the coal of the heart. They are dark days of asking questions. What is love? What is forgiveness? Time spent rocking the timeless wounds that the child in me reveals. Hurt that will never completely go away, and that came from a time long before I was born. La que sabe, the one who knows, is the priestess at the doorway to the cave. She keeps me safe. She reminds me of the greater love that holds all that was, all that is, and all that will ever be. She smiles, an aged, wise, and knowing smile as I catch a glimpse of her. Thank you all for coming or for participating today. And last thing I'd like to say, I hope this is an encouragement for you to advocate for the children and for women in particular that care for the children. Thank you.
Thank you, Regina Griego. Thank you all. Everyone, take good care.
Bye-bye.